Hello all, Game Master Matt here, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to start a series of videos talking about one of my all-time favorite games here, Symbaroum, by Free League Publishing. And this series is going to follow multiple themes. This first part's going to be a little bit shorter. It's just going to be a general introduction and overview of what Symbaroum is, what to expect, and what to expect kind of from this series. Future episodes, I'm going to talk about character creation, combat, abilities, mystical powers, how to game master, how to run the game, some core elements of the game, and so on. And then eventually, I also want to talk a little bit more about the lore of the setting of Symbaroum. But today is really just about an introduction into what you can expect and, maybe take a closer look at this absolute gem of a game out of Sweden. The Symbaroum is not a new game. It actually first got published in 2016 by, checking my notes, Yenringen out of Sweden, who then merged together and created the company of Free League Publishing, under which Symbaroum is currently run, along with the Ruins of Symbaroum, which is a 5th edition conversion of the setting of Symbaroum and some of the general themes. I haven't really looked at it, so I can't comment much on that, but in my opinion, the best way to experience Symbaroum is to play the actual Symbaroum way. And what is the actual Symbaroum way? So Symbaroum is a D20 roll under system. So it's based off of 8 core attributes that range in value between 5 and 15, even though, yes, there are certain abilities where you can push it beyond 15, but for the most part, it's between 5 and 15. And what you're aiming to do is with a 20-sided dice, roll equal to or under the associated attribute, which is then modified by the challenge of either your opponents, if you're in combat, or if you're trying to sneak past somebody, or the level of a trap, or anything like that. So that kind of modifies that plus or minus. Now, when you say you're making a resolute -3 test and you have a resolute of 12, the -3 does not apply to your 20-sided dice roll, instead it applies to your attribute. So a resolute of 12 is now a resolute of 9, so you need to roll 9 or less to have a success. Now, aside from the 8 core attributes, there are 4 secondary attributes which are derived from some of these 8 core attributes. Now, I'm going to go into depth with those once I do the episode talking about character creation, but your core attributes do determine how much physical damage you can take and how much corruption you can handle, as well as some defensive abilities. Now, corruption is a major, major component of this game. It is a very deadly game. So, for the most part, your toughness, which is basically hit points, if we're thinking in Dungeons and Dragons terms, is capped out at 15, like at the high end. Then you also have a pain threshold, which is half of your strong. Again, I'll get into that in character creation, but you can die physically, but you can also die not mentally. This isn't a mechanic like, say, in Call of Cthulhu, but corruption. So dealing with mystical powers or tainted artifacts or abominations or going into corrupted parts of the big forest of Davokar. And I would wager to say that more player characters have succumbed to the effects of corruption rather than physical combat or anything like that. So everything really matters. The beauty of Symbaroum is, unlike Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, where you've got dump stats, which is a term I absolutely hate, in Symbaroum, dump stat at your own risk, so to speak. I mean, yes, there are some, if you're going for a certain type of character creation, that you can dump stat something. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses, but really, really need to think about it a lot before you decide, I don't care about this, because if it affects either your toughness or your corruption thresholds, Yeah, it can be a short tenure for your adventure in the world of Symbaroum. The other key aspect that a lot of people will find interesting is that Symbaroum is an entirely player facing mechanic. That means, or let's say 99% player facing. That means the players make all the rolls. The GM makes none. And it's all obviously in the open. And I've had discussions with players about this, and most really like it. I've had some people, not players, but some people online I've seen criticize Symbaroum because they said, well, I have nobody to blame but myself. Okay, so you don't have a scapegoat in the GM. Good for us, GMs. And some GM said, well, then I can't fudge dice rolls if I want to alter something. That's correct. You can't. Now, you can mess with modifiers to a degree, but for the most part, no, not really. I mean, there's no secret rolling, there is situational rolling. It's all very honest in the open and very straightforward for the players to understand. You tell them, it's whatever attribute, cunning, +2. They know, all right, if I had an 8, now it's a 10, I got to roll 10 or lower. I mean, there is no ambiguity there. And that is really, really nice. Unlike in games like Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, combat is really, really fast in Symbaroum. And it is pretty, cinematic to a degree. I'll go over combat as its own episode, but all the players that have come from only playing 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons with me and tried Symbaroum and we're running a campaign right now, they absolutely love it. I mean, they love combat in this game versus the way it is in D&D 5th edition because it is fast, you quickly get through rounds, it's very deadly for all parties concerned, and that just makes it so interesting, so visceral at the table because every roll, every moment really counts and you really don't want to miss anything. There's not a lot of thumb twirling or phone looking by players who are not acting because one, turns go by quickly, and two, the stakes are super, super high no matter how powerful or weak you or your opponents are. The other big component of Symbaroum is the setting itself. Now, I did a separate video on why I consider the Symbaroum setting the perfect setting in role playing game sense. You can always check that out here on the channel. But it's a micro setting, so it is a very geographically focused setting, but then in the small focus, it goes really wide and deep. The factions are interesting, the history is interesting. Everything that's both known by the player and what gets revealed to the GM is fascinating. And playing in this world is really, really a big attraction to it, beyond the great mechanics that are just fast, intuitive, and no constraints. That's the other thing. No constraints, and you'll see that in character creation. You can really create whatever you want. There are no classes in this game. It's also not a skill based game. There's no list of skills. You have attributes, and then you have abilities that kind of adjust attributes in given situations. They're more like augments than anything else. So you don't have skills in the traditional sense of a skill list. So it really is whatever you want it to be. And what is Symbaroum? Well, it's dark fantasy. Definitely lower fantasy. Even though magic does exist, it's very, very dangerous. So a little sword and sorcery there. It's horror. There are definite horror elements in it. And then what are you playing? It's exploration, it's survival, it's mysteries, it's political intrigue. I mean, really all pillars of play are in play depending on what you want. But obviously, exploring Davokar, going through ruins, dealing with the abominations in that forest is a core component and one that every campaign, I'll be honest, has to have to truly experience the game mechanics as well as the setting itself. So, what does it compare to? I mean, the creator, one of them, and I will absolutely butcher his name. I apologize for that. Matthias Jonsson Hocke, I think, is he once said it's Princess Mononoke meets Game of Thrones. So it's intrigue, it's visceral, it's darker, grim, dark fantasy, and civilization fighting nature kind of a thing, and the forest fighting back and its creatures. But I would add also that you have elements of Elden Ring in this because it is potential to be a huge sandbox where you can create whatever you want. And the legendary creatures you may encounter just remind me a lot of some of those epic boss fights from Elden Ring. So I would say it's Game of Thrones, Princess Mononoke, a little bit of Dark Souls thrown in there as well. So what do you need to play Symbaroum? Well, you need all your polyhedrals. I mean, really everything. D20, 12, 10, 8, 4, 6, all of it is required in the game. The core mechanic goes with a D20, but then when you are rolling for damage and for armor or anything like that, that's when you have to roll then your smaller polyhedrals. The GM again doesn't do any rolls because all the stats are static for the opponents, so there's no rolling needed there. The only other thing you definitely need is the core rulebook. Everybody needs this. This has everything you need to run the game. So you don't need 3 books. What you have in here, you have a history, a lore section. You have a very detailed player section that covers the rules on combat and resolution, attributes, and character creation. You have a GM section, which I would urge no players to read. Then there's also an starter adventure in there, a promised land, which I have run with players, which is a lot of fun. Good intro. And there's equipment in there. There's a very detailed bestiary in there. So really everything you really need is in that core rulebook. Now, as players, you may then, when you have the core rulebook, think about getting the advanced player's guide that gives you more options as far as get professions that go in there, new abilities, mystical powers, rituals. The boons and burdens system comes in there, more elixirs and potions and poisons, which is a core part of this game. Also, pyrotechnics come in. I mean, it's really a cool book. Now, for you GMs, I definitely recommend the Game Master's Guide because it just kind of shows you how the game is not supposed to be run, but what the design principles are of it, which really, really helped me. I'm a big fan of Game Master guides, and this one does not disappoint at all. It also details some other places like the Underworld or the Yonder World and other aspects of play, including exploration, survival, encumbrance, all that kind of stuff. And then the Monster Codex. If you want more monsters, if you want the full breakdown on the mechanics of monster hunting, which is really, really cool component. That's all in there, along with great adventure hooks. And then after that, you can, as the GM, you look at the adventure collections and then the Throne of Thorns Chronicle, the big mega campaign, where half of the book, almost-ish, is simply setting and lore and adventure hooks for your own homebrew stuff. So I definitely recommend those. But really, you just need the core rulebook. You don't need the other things to play and enjoy Symbaroum, even though they do add, and I have everything. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this. The next episode will be covering character creation for sure, because I got to walk you guys through that. So it's probably going to be a little bit longer. And then after that, we're going to get into combat, mystical powers, rituals, and so much more. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please hit that like button, subscribe to not miss anything here on the channel, including more Symbaroum content, as well as other role-playing game content. Until next time, I am Game Master Matt, and I will talk to you soon.